For nearly 2 decades, she existed in the background of one of Hollywood's most extraordinary stories. A little girl carried in her father's arms on the world's most famous red carpets. A child who grew up as the living symbol of one of the most talked-about romances in modern celebrity history. And then, one day, she simply disappeared from that world. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with a tearful interview, not with the kind of public spectacle her father has built his entire career around. She disappeared quietly, deliberately, and on her own terms. Her name is Suri, and until recently, the world knew her only as Suri Cruise, daughter of Tom Cruise, one of the most powerful actors Hollywood has ever produced. But something has shifted. At 19 years old, this young woman has begun to speak. Not through press releases, not through a publicist, not through carefully staged paparazzi photos. She has spoken through choices so deliberate, so unmistakable, and so quietly powerful that they have stunned fans, journalists, and industry insiders alike. The message she is sending is one that no one who remembers that beaming little girl from 2006 could have fully anticipated. This is her story. And for the first time, it is being told the way it deserves, not as a tabloid footnote, but as the journey of a young woman who grew up in the eye of a storm and walked out the other side as her own person. April 18, 2006. The date that Suri Cruise arrived in this world was treated less like a private family moment and more like a global event. Her parents, Tom Cruise, then 43 years old and at the absolute zenith of his cultural power, and Katie Holmes, a 27-year-old actress who had charmed an entire generation through her role in Dawson's Creek, had been together less than a year when they announced the pregnancy. The world had barely recovered from Tom's now legendary appearance on The Oprah Winfrey Show, where he had jumped on the couch and declared himself irrevocably in love. Now, there was a baby. There was a family. There was a fairy tale. Except that fairy tales, as anyone who has read the original versions knows, are rarely as simple as they appear from the very beginning. The circumstances of Suri's birth carried the unmistakable fingerprints of her father's deep, all-consuming devotion to Scientology. The church, which had been the central organizing force of Tom Cruise's life for decades, held particular views about childbirth, most notably, the practice of silent birth, in which those present in the delivery room are expected to remain quiet so as not to traumatize the newborn with disruptive sounds and energy. Tom had also, in a move that struck many outside observers as somewhere between devoted and controlling, purchased his own sonogram machine during the pregnancy so he could monitor Katie and the baby himself. To him, it was love. To the outside world, it raised questions that would only grow louder over the years to come. When Tom and Katie married that November in a lavish ceremony at a 15th-century castle in Bracciano, Italy, the guest list read like a Hollywood almanac. The dress was Giorgio Armani. The price tag reportedly exceeded $3 million. The photographs were breathtaking. And somewhere in the middle of all that magnificent spectacle was a 6-month-old baby girl who had absolutely no say in any of it. A child who had been born, from her very first breath, into a life that was not entirely her own. For the first few years of her life, Suri Cruise was arguably the most photographed child on the planet. Cameras followed her everywhere, to coffee shops in New York, to parks in Los Angeles, to airports around the world. Her outfits were analyzed. Her hair was discussed. Entire gossip columns were devoted to the question of whether she was being raised appropriately, whether she spent too much time in heels, whether she was old enough for lipstick. She was a toddler. She was a preschooler. She was a child. And the world could not stop staring at her. What the cameras could not capture, however, was what was happening behind closed doors. According to multiple accounts from people close to the family during that period, life inside the Cruise household was shaped powerfully by Scientologist structures and expectations. Katie Holmes, who had been raised as a devout Catholic in Toledo, Ohio, found herself gradually drawn into a world that operated by entirely different rules. Rules about who could be trusted, what information could be shared, and which relationships were appropriate to maintain. Friends from her life before Tom noticed that she became harder to reach. Her public statements about her husband began to take on a rehearsed quality, as though she was reciting lines rather than speaking from her heart. Her family, particularly her father Martin Holmes, a sharp and quietly watchful attorney, grew increasingly concerned for Suri. Growing up inside this tension meant something specific and lasting. She was the daughter of a man who was, by any objective measure, one of the most famous human beings alive, a man whose entire professional life was built around performing, projecting, and controlling public perception. And she was the daughter of a woman who was slowly, painfully learning that she had traded one kind of life for another kind entirely, and that the trade had not been what she expected. June 29, 2012. Suri Cruise was 6 years old. And on that summer morning, her mother did something that sent shockwaves through Hollywood, through the tabloid industry, through Scientology circles, and through living rooms around the world. Katie Holmes filed for divorce from Tom Cruise. What made the filing remarkable was not just the fact of it, but the extraordinary precision with which it had been executed. For months, according to accounts that emerged in the years following, Katie had been preparing in secret. She had changed her phone. She had quietly replaced staff members she suspected of loyalty to Scientology. She had consulted with her father, who helped her understand both the legal landscape and the strategic choices available to her. She chose to file in New York rather than California, a decision driven at least in part by the different legal frameworks governing child custody in each state. She filed while Tom was overseas, filming in Iceland. He reportedly learned about the divorce the same way everyone else did, through headlines. The divorce was finalized in just 11 days, a speed that itself told a story about the kind of settlement Katie had been prepared to accept and the kind she absolutely would not. She walked away with full legal and physical custody of Suri. Tom agreed to pay $400,000 annually in child support, along with health insurance, educational expenses, and additional costs as they arose. Financially, Suri would be taken care of. But the agreement contained something more significant than money. It contained distance. Legal, documented, enforceable distance between Suri and the world her father inhabited. Former Scientology members who have spoken publicly over the years have suggested that one of Katie's primary fears was the prospect of Suri eventually being enrolled in the Sea organization, the church's most dedicated inner cadre, whose members sign billion-year contracts and live and work under demanding conditions. Whether or not that specific fear drove every decision, the outcome was clear. Katie took her daughter and moved to New York. The cameras that had followed Suri everywhere suddenly found a very different subject. A little girl walking through Chelsea with her mother. No handlers in sight, no staged appearances, no entourage. Just a child and her mom, doing ordinary things in an extraordinary city. What followed the divorce was, in many ways, more revealing than the divorce itself. Because what followed was silence. Tom Cruise, who had described Suri's birth as the happiest day of his life, who had spoken about her with an intensity that bordered on reverence, who had carried her through airports and smiled at her on red carpets. That man essentially disappeared from her daily life. Reports surfaced as early as 2013 that he had seen her only once since the settlement. After that single brief meeting, there were no confirmed sightings of the two together, no photographs, no public references. In a deposition that year related to a separate legal matter, Tom was asked directly whether Katie had left him in part to protect Suri from Scientology. He called the question offensive. And then he acknowledged that yes, it was one of the assertions being made. It was the closest thing to a public reckoning that he ever offered. And it wasn't very close at all. In the years that followed, Tom threw himself into work with a ferocity that seemed almost deliberate in its intensity. Mission: Impossible sequels. Top Gun, Maverick. Stunts that continued to defy both physics and common sense. He climbed buildings, hung from aircraft, performed underwater sequences that would test trained specialists. The world cheered. The box office numbers were extraordinary. And somewhere in New York City, a little girl was growing up attending school and going to dance class and becoming, by all accounts, a remarkably grounded and self-possessed young person. Entirely without him. Katie, for her part, focused everything she had on providing Suri with a life that was as normal as their circumstances would allow. She enrolled her daughter in a private school in Manhattan. She took her to parks and museums and neighborhood cafes. She kept her away from red carpets and press events. She protected her from the spotlight with a consistency and determination that people who knew them described as almost fierce. Friends who saw Suri during her middle school years described a girl who was bright and kind, perceptive well beyond her years, with her mother's eyes and a quiet watchfulness that seemed like it came from somewhere deeper than personality. She grew up watching her father from a distance, through screens, through headlines, through the experience of being recognized in public not for who she was, but for who her father was. And somewhere in that growing up, she made a decision that would not become visible to the world until she was nearly an adult. There are moments in a person's life that are so quiet, so seemingly small, that the world almost misses them. And then there are moments that, once you understand their context, are anything but small. In her senior year at New York's LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts, the legendary institution whose reputation inspired the film and television series Fame, Suri participated in the school's production of the Addams Family musical. The program for that production listed the performers by name. And the name listed for Suri was not Suri Cruise, it was Suri Noel. Noel is Katie Holmes's middle name. The choice to use it was not an accident. It was not a stage name adopted for casual reasons. It was a declaration, quiet, dignified, and completely unambiguous. When Suri graduated from LaGuardia in June 2024, the official graduation list carried the same name, Suri Noel. Her father was not present for the ceremony. He was, according to reports at the time, attending a concert in London. Katie was there, sitting among the other parents, reportedly in tears as her daughter crossed the stage. The contrast between those two images, a father at a concert across an ocean, a mother crying in a school auditorium, captured something that no interview, no press release, and no carefully worded statement ever could. It captured the shape of a life, the shape of a choice, the shape of what 19 years of silence actually looks like when it finally finds a form.